you're ready to wake up, you're going to wake up. And if you're not ready, you're going to stay pretending that you're just poor little me.
Do you feel it?
Yes, we do.
A worldwide awakening is upon us. Welcome to the Universal Consciousness Show.
The Universal Consciousness Show,
where we explore topics such as UFOs, aliens, banned medical cures, as well as classified secret knowledge. Come question your holographic existence. Share experiences from the other side. This is a show that will expand your mind as we decrypt the symbolic messages locked away deep within your DNA. And now, your guides for this magical journey. The hosts of the Universal Consciousness Show, Avi Nast and Diana Seraphim.
Hello, everybody around the world, wherever you are. How are you doing so far in 2020? Boys, it's going to be an interesting year for us. We are going to learn so much that our heads will explode if we did not know how to deal with it, because we are learning here. We are learning on all the shows that is on this platform. And for those of you out there that is listening right now, you are listening to one of the best shows that I know. And you are listening to the show for the Thinking American. My name is Agi, and I'm one of the hosts, and I have my co-host over in Germany. Hi, Diana.
Hello, everyone. I'm here.
All right. Now, before I introduce my guest here, I want to tell you a little bit about how you can connect with us. You can visit us on our website as www.universal-consciousness-show.com, or we are on YouTube with the same name, Universal Consciousness Show. And also, please subscribe while you're there. Click on that red button and subscribe. And also, if you click on that little bell next to it, then you will get notifications when there are new shows coming out. And that would be a good thing. And for those of you who like to hear this show again, go to the Universal Consciousness Show website, and you will find us there. And of course, we are on YouTube and absolutely on KCOR Radio website. That is at kcorradio.com. You will also find us there in the archives. And we're on Twitter, iTunes, TuneIn, Alexa, Facebook, and a few other places. So you'll find us out there. And if you are listening to the KCOR Radio website right now, then there is this little feature, this phenomenally nice feature down at the bottom of the page. It's a donate button. If you like what you hear, we would love to see you help us out and tell us that we are doing the right thing, and show us a little bit of gratitude also through maybe a donation. But if you can't, that is perfectly all right. We love you, and we are so glad you are there listening. So then, let me get to the guest. We have Jane Broida with us. She is returning to the Universal Consciousness Show. And we had a show with her, it's a little over a year ago now. And we were talking about her book that she had written just come out at that time. And here is a little bit about what she is. She is an investigative reporter and an author, has written hundreds of published articles on wide-ranging subjects from politics to health, finance, technology, climate, the paranormal. And she's a regular contributor to thedailyconspiracy.com. And you'll find her there under the pen name Lightworker111. And she has written a very interesting book, Unknown Objects. And that is about the top 10 United States UFO cases. And you know, many of us have been called crazy for believing that UFOs are real. But if you read this book, you are going to be called crazy for a totally different reason. And that is that if you don't believe in UFOs, you're going to be called crazy. So I think we're going to turn the tables on that one, even on this show. And you will find her on Amazon under Unknown Objects, and her name Jean Broida. And you can contact her at jean@lightwork111.com. And she also started her own radio show. So let's hear more about this. Welcome to the show, Jean.
Thank you, Age. Hi, everybody out there in Viewerland. Hi, Diana in Germany. It's so great to be here.
Yeah.
Hello, Jean. Hello, and thank you so much for being again with us today. Could you please start by telling us, how did it all start for you? How did this all begin for you? How did you end up on this wonderful path you are walking today?
Well, that's a long story and probably would take more than the hour we have today, but let's just bullet point it, shall we?
Try to squeeze it in a few words.
I'm the kind of person who at age 4, I wonder how many viewers and listeners can relate to this. At age 4, one day I asked my mother, "Why are we here?" 4-year-old asking her mother, "Why are we here?" She says, "We're here making your bed," which was true. And I said, no, you misunderstand me. You know, in 4-year-old speak, I'm saying, what's the purpose of life? Why are we here on Earth? So I sort of popped out of the womb inquisitive about human origin, which has been a lifelong interest of mine. In elementary school, I just knew that the history we were taught was maybe factually correct, but that conclusions made by the instructors and textbook writers were way off base, claiming that people who built the pyramids were primitive peoples, things like this. It just didn't hold water. It didn't stand up to even elementary school reasoning. Then I found a section of the library I'd never seen before. I was over at the university library, and so it had more sections than the elementary and junior high and high school libraries I was used to, and had read all the books anyway of interest. And I found a section I'd never heard of, paranormal. Well, what's that? So there were books on ghosts and Loch Nessie and UFOs. And I had no interest particularly in ghosts, no interest in the cryptids, the animals, but UFOs were of immediate interest to me. And I fell into Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken. I know that book influenced a lot of people. It changed my life in a very literal way. And a highlight of my life was meeting Mr. von Däniken at Contact in the Desert last year, end of May, early June. I took his intensive workshop. The man is groundbreaking. He's a living legend. And it was so worth the time and trouble to get to meet him in person. It was really a thrill. I'm so grateful that he makes the effort to go around and lecture, and has been doing for decades. And he, of course, was treated with derision and ridicule. He didn't come from a scientific or research background. He just fell into it the way I sort of fell into it afterwards, you know, in the next generation, as it were. So I had also read books by the likes of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who many people will know was a civilian scientist on Project Blue Book out of University of Colorado, Boulder, an extensive multi-year research project to look into the UFO matter, unidentified flying objects. Yeah. The conclusion of that study, after reviewing more than some 400 cases, was that 40%, maybe 1% of those cases were genuinely unexplained, not swamp gas, not St. Elmo's fire, not Venus, not a phase of the moon. Nothing like that. That these were genuinely unexplained, very perplexing objects stalling in air, accelerating at great speeds, performing maneuvers no terrestrial man-made aircraft was capable of in those days at that time. So I took a couple of these books to my dad, who was a scientist who had worked on nuclear development in the early 1950s. He'd spent 1 year right out of college. He was tapped by an Air Force general to work on helping to develop the first 10 megaton nuclear devices. And after a year rigging up electronics towers to measure the radiation effects, so we're talking about heat as well as unseen energy bands, all sorts of energy, after World War II ended precipitously with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, scientists around the world, governments around the world began to question this thing, radiation. What is it? Because it was acting capriciously. In a test field of 100 constructed houses, this is the project my dad worked on in the Southwest desert. The Army would come in, Air Force would come in and build, I believe it was Army actually, built 10 rows of 10 houses, just plywood frame houses, but with roofs, and they put furnishings inside and actually put mannequins inside. They wanted to see what would happen when you detonated blasts, and what they found was very interesting. Out of 100 houses, 95, say, would be flattened, obliterated, and 5 houses in no apparent pattern would be left completely intact. And they found similar results in Japan after the nukes there, that strange and unexplainable physics was going on. I took these two books about UFOs to my dad, the scientist in my life. I'm about 12 years old, 14 maybe, and beginning to really question what's going on. JFK had been killed and the lone gunman theory had been proposed, and there was already doubt about that in a lot of people's minds, not my mind, but there was a sense in our society that maybe things weren't really as our government told us they were across the board. After World War II, there was a lot of faith and confidence in the United States government. And by the time of JFK's assassination, that was starting to erode. And the nation had been warned by Eisenhower of the rise of the military-industrial complex, and by JFK that certainly nations need to keep secrets, but we want to be aware of and have some accountability from secret societies in our own country. So he warned about secret societies. And by the time I went to my dad, I have all this knowledge about this stuff. I'm thinking I'm going to get quick agreement from him when I ask him, Dad, I'm reading these books. These people seem credible and well-researched. What do you think? Are there UFOs? Do UFOs exist? And he looked me right in the eye. He took a breath before he answered. He said, the United States government has no proof that UFOs exist. And now, decades later, I do logic, I do math, I do science, I do mysticism, I do it all. And a lot of people do. I don't see any disparity between physics and metaphysics. They are metaphysics is a higher octave of physics. I'm a musician as well, so I think in a lot of connecting terms. I'd rather see connection than disconnection. I know you guys do too. And this is a long story, but I told you it would be. So he's told me they don't exist, and I trust him. He's my dad. And now I'm thinking, and now he's dead, I'm thinking either he knew he was lying or he thought he was telling the truth. If he knew he was lying, he did it for one of two reasons: to stop my inquisitiveness, thinking it might get me in trouble, and related to that, to keep me out of trouble, to keep me from asking questions that might target me, a term we now use. Didn't want me to be a targeted individual. There's a third possibility. He was actually working as a double life. He was absent quite a bit. He might have been tasked by the Air Force to reverse engineer UFOs. And if I had asked him point blank, do UFOs exist, and that were his secret job, and I'm not saying he did it or didn't, I don't know, I don't have this proof, but let's just say he did. And I'm asking him point blank, do they exist? And he's been working on them, has laid eyes on them, whether he worked on them or not, was taken to the hangar, as Bob Lazar has said. A lot of these engineers were taken to hangars with UFOs in them, shown UFOs, offered to work on them. Some said yes, some said no. If my dad had said no, he might have just been flabbergasted and struggling for an answer. Well, his answer didn't stop my interest, because my psychic self was telling me this is a cover-up. There's more to this than meets the eyes. And then soon after that, I started tarot card reading. I fell in with metaphysicists later in my life, trained as a Western magician for 8 years, have led Wiccan groups. I've done a lot of things, and I've seen a lot of stuff. And now it's not that I believe in UFOs. I'm convinced my government knows they exist. It's quite different.
Yeah, and beyond that too, when you see stuff, that is evidence to you.
It is, but all my life I've never had a desire to see UFOs. I'm not a UFO chaser. I've been to MUFON meetings and I admire what they do, but I went to a Colorado MUFON meeting a few years ago when I lived in Colorado, and the state director happened to be there in the Denver area and present at every meeting and kicking off the meetings. And at the very first meeting, I introduced myself to everyone. At the time, I was running the Denver UFO Disclosure Project, modeled more or less after Dr. Stephen Greer's International Disclosure Project. And so I went as a representative of my own group, the leader of my own group, and I asked, to what end is MUFON collecting all of these case reports, all of this data, and all of this visual information? What happens to it? You guys have been collecting data since the 1960s, and now it's the 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s. Why are we still looking? Isn't there plenty of evidence? Because the government has not changed its position about this.
Yeah.
And the state director said, we do collect the data and we do send it off to Washington, D.C. And I said, and then what happens? And he said, experts in image analysis look over all this data and draw their conclusions. And I thought, experts. I'm looking around the room thinking this room is full of experts.
Yeah.
I myself had experience with image analysis. There's a lot of mystique surrounding some of these sciences and technical applications that is frankly unwarranted. With proper training, anybody can do this stuff, just as with psychic abilities. So I wasn't happy with that answer. The government gobbles up the information and sits on it. So although I respect people who chase UFOs, it's not my bag, baby. What I do is research known facts that people haven't discovered or just aren't paying attention to, and I try to knit them into a cohesive narrative, especially where I can synthesize several different things and bring them together to make a coherent narrative. I love doing that.
Yeah. Let's look at the other side of the coin. You wrote a book about the top 10 USA UFO cases.
The top 10 U.S. UFO cases, yeah.
Yeah, that's the ships. What do we know about the inhabitants or the people that was in the ships? What do we know about them?
Well, that's a great question, Age, and it's on more and more people's minds, people who research UFOs and people who have had UFO encounters. Very little is actually known, it seems to me. It's all hearsay, meaning that what we know is reported by experiencers who claim to receive psychic impressions or actual data downloads. And there's good, strong evidence about the nature of some of these downloads, especially those that happen in binary code, thought to be a universal language between advanced intelligences and us, who are not as intelligent. That's an assumption we make. But the questions I wondered after reading Betty and Barney Hill's account, Betty Hill, this abduction occurred in 1961. It's in my book, an early chapter. This couple was abducted out of, basically as they were driving home in the middle of the night in rural New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And according to the wife, Betty, who willed herself back into consciousness so that she remembered what was going on the ship, whereas Barney, her husband, was afraid and didn't want to remember anything and kept his eyes closed. She was eyes open, relatively awake, because they had hypnotized them, basically, as I understand it, put them under some kind of mental control. And she reported laughing and joking with their leader. So that made me think, as with my psychology background, what do these ETs have emotions? Because when you look at Greek mythology, the Greek gods were very petty. They got angry. They were jealous, vindictive. And the Old Testament God, it has many of those same attributes. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone's belief system. I'm telling you how I, as a skeptical researcher, saw all this information, interpreted all this information. So in terms of what the message is, I think the purest messages are coming through children. And I'm thinking specifically of the mass, I forget exactly how many, but maybe 20-some school children in Africa who witnessed a UFO touchdown, a couple of beings float out of it toward them. They were afraid. The message they got was, the earth is in danger of overpollution. Tell the adults to clean up their act. And the other message most people seem to get from benevolent beings, those that like humans, is love each other. Well, every ascended master since forever, since recorded history, has said love each other as you would yourself. Unfortunately, in the Western world, we're not being taught even how to love ourselves, much less how to love each other, which is why shows like yours are so important, Age and Diana, because you're encouraging people who are positive thinkers to stay positive and associate ourselves with positive, productive people who don't wallow in this negativity and non-productivity of wham, 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 boo-hoo. I hate the way it is and it will never change. If anything's going to change, we are going to change it. No one else. The ETs aren't going to show up and save us. I am convinced of that. They have some sort of hands-off policy until you get into nuclear proliferation. I believe, from reports I've read, many reports, that nuclear explosions, like my dad was working on, rend the space-time continuum, the fabric of the universe, and that effects here on Earth are felt in universes away. It may take time. It may not take time. We don't understand any of this stuff. It's beyond our knowledge.
That's what I understand too. They will not allow that to happen to affect others. And now I see we got 1 minute left for the break. When we come back, I want to talk a little more about these extraterrestrials, because there is actually government evidence to the fact that yes, they do exist and they have them in frozen boxes, and there is some of this out there. So let's go to the break and we will be right back with Gene Broida.
You're listening to the Universal Consciousness Show.
The Universal Consciousness Show.
Your weekly connection to the truth.
You get to really sort of enjoy a bizarre ride.
Share your knowledge by calling our hotline number at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers find us on Skype at KCOR Radio. It's time to abandon your fear and question what you think you know.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
More awakening awaits.
After this, after this, after this, after this, after this, after this.
Hello, KCOR listeners. Lorian Fenton here from the Fenton Files to tell you about UFOCon 2020 in San Francisco, February 20th through 23rd. A conference like no other, UFOCon is where experiencers are going to reveal new information and science and consciousness will collide. So get your tickets at UFOCon2020.com. That's UFOCon2020.com. Don't miss what will be the most talked about conference of the decade.
The Fenton Files, where it's all connected.
You see, whoever controls technology controls the world.
Come explore a universe full of possibilities. Every Monday night at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. The Fenton Files. Go where no other show has gone before.
You can deny all the things I've seen, all the things I've discovered, but not for much longer. Because too many others know what's happening out there.
Whether it be UFOs, aliens, conspiracies, or even consciousness, your host, Lorian Fenton, has a file for that. The Fenton Files. Your journey to the truth is but a file away. Live, Monday nights, 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The Fenton Files.
Incredibly intense.
Where truth is just waiting to be discovered.
Monday nights are about to become hauntingly good, as Reverend Sean Whittington possesses the airwaves with Vegas Supernatural. Tune in every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern for Vegas Supernatural, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. There's a war raging between good and evil. The question is, which side are you fighting on? Tune in Monday nights as Reverend Sean Whittington sets the new standard for paranormal radio with some of the most influential personalities in the world today. Vegas Supernatural, hosted by Reverend Sean Whittington, every Monday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The one show even the devil doesn't want you to hear.
Great.
It's great. I think it's great. I think it's
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
great. Make a note of it. It's great.
Are you ready to go?
It's showtime!
Here we go, world.
You're listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Broadcasting from the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Their base is so large it has to draw most of its power from the nearby nuclear fusion plant.
The future of radio is here and now.
Going live in 3, 2, 1.
It's time, once again, to unravel the mysteries of the universe by connecting the dots to a higher consciousness. This is the Universal Consciousness Show.
The Universal Consciousness Show.
Now the world will begin hearing us.
Share your knowledge by calling 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
It's as simple as that.
Find us on Twitter at KCOR Radio or use hashtag KCOR. Even better, join us on the live chat at KCORradio.com. Back to your enlightened hosts, Avi Nast and Diana Serafini.
Hello. We are back with the Universal Consciousness Show, and we're talking to Jean Broida. And we've been talking about aliens.
But before we go further with our topic, Aggie, I would like to read a question from the chat room here. We have Margaret asking, has Jean ever had contact with aliens? And how does she receive her psychic visions?
Margaret, thank you so much for listening in, and thank you for posing a couple of really excellent questions. I appreciate your interest, and I hope you're enthusiastic as I am. Have I ever had contact with aliens? That's a good question. From further researches in my life, I have every reason to believe that I was a child abductee when I was 3 and 4 years old. And therefore, I've probably been abducted the rest of my life. And in fact, other family members are probably also being abducted, but I can't prove it. I've never had any direct memory and I've suppressed a lot of memories. In a hypnotherapy workshop, I began crying and my body began convulsing. I have such a mental block against regressing back to that time period. And that workshop was for people who suspected they had been abducted by aliens but were repressing those memories. I believe I have a whole closet full or room full or warehouse full of repressed memories. And I believe, based on what I've heard from the lips of the now deceased Dolores Cannon, that I'm a voluntary starseed who came in during the late 1950s as first wave, and that I have work here to do, great work with initial capitals. My great work is to raise consciousness on Earth about the UFO and alien presence and counteract government suppression.
Yeah.
The second question was, how do I receive my psychic visions? I receive them as intuition. Another great question. I wrote a story. I've been a story writer all my life. And in elementary school, I was captivated with Alfred Hitchcock's anthologies. And I love the story twist. I love a twist ending. And I had to write a short story or a short piece of writing for class. We all had a class assignment, write something, a couple pages. And I wrote a story about a person who was basically me, a young female child, who was actually exercising, running around the block and doing an internal monologue, what we might call a dialectic, where it's a logical path of reasoning and reaching conclusions. And then when telling other people about this, people are saying, well, how do you know that? And this character as me as this character saying, I just know. Mm-hmm. And I get a lot of ideas that just basically pop into my head. But I also channel information through guided path working, guided meditations. It's best when I work with somebody else who can scribe for that. I work with pendulums, I work with dowsing rods, and I work with tarot cards. So I can invoke a psychic event, as it were, under the right circumstances, and if it's appropriate, and if the questioning is sound. My psychic guides believe I'm mature enough psychically not to be bothered with trivial questions. They only answer important ones. Mm-hmm. And I get a lot of ideas just pop in my head. I was struggling with how to write my book, and I'd started it a couple of times, and one day I woke up and I had a very clear understanding of what needed to happen. An airport read, 10 chapters, so a top 10 pages a chapter. And there's my book. And I've picked my topics in chronological order. That came very rapidly. And I wrote the book in 4 weeks. That's how ready I was for this to come out. So just as great inventors such as Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison and many others have attributed their inspiration to dreams, I tend to operate the same way. And they may have been fudging the truth. Who knows how they got their inspiration, really. Tesla was indicating that he knew there were beings that were communicating with him.
Yeah.
And I think he described them as more or less angelic, as in positive. So yeah. Those are great questions, Margaret. Thank you again.
Yeah, and let's get back to the extraterrestrials just a little more. I know, in fact, I have on my computer and I have in my files several documents that was written on FBI paper. In fact, I wrote to the FBI and I got a copy of some of those documents myself, including the cover letter that comes with it. So I know they come out of the FBI files, where they explain that, yes, we found these 5, in this case 5, they call them EBEs, in a crashed disk. And they explain what they look like, big heads, slanted eyes, and they go into details on it. And so just a one-pager on the one I'm thinking of first. So we have government documents, and you mentioned there are other places too where people can go and read some of these things.
There are indeed. And first of all, I commend you, Age, for taking the effort to write to the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and get these source documents. This is the basis for sound research as far as I'm concerned. And if you want to go find out for yourself what our government knows about UFOs, I invite you to head over to the CIA.gov website, Central Intelligence Agency. That organization did a massive data dump a couple of years ago, millions of pages of thousands of documents, and you can do a keyword search on UFOs and read to your heart's content. You can also go to the blackvault.com, theblackvault.com. The people running that site have been doing this for decades, and there's very few more voluminous sources. There are many good sources, don't get me wrong, but this site is dedicated to this one topic, basically. And there's a lot of information when you go start looking for it. The naysayers will say, where's the proof? How can you prove that UFOs exist? There's no physical evidence. Well, there's no physical evidence that you and I, everyday people, have, but every reason to believe that world governments have plenty of evidence they will never release to us. At first, the thinking in government was it's too scary. People are too, in the case of the United States, too Christian, I'm just going to say it, that it would rock their belief system and topple theology as we know it, and civilizations would crumble. But now, that's perhaps not as sound an excuse. Now, with the rise of the military-industrial complex, defense contractors, black ops, and trillions of dollars unaccountable from Pentagon budget, there's every reason to think that a lot of money is going into the cover-up and denial. When people deny very vigorously the existence of UFOs, I immediately begin to think they're paid to have that opinion. They're operating for the CIA in some capacity. Perhaps you're a sub-organization. But why, in the face of all this good, solid evidence, such as you have in your hand there, Augie, an FBI document, how can you say there's no proof? Because our government scooped up the physical evidence and kept it from us. We have a lot of insiders saying they saw the stuff. They saw beings. So what do you need for proof?
Yeah, and the thing about it is that disclosure has already happened. In fact, Medvedev, the president of Russia, about 3 years ago, he was on live camera. He said he was asked if he had been briefed on UFOs and the extraterrestrials, and he says, well, yeah. He says, when I took the office, he says, we got the dossier that explains the UFOs and the extraterrestrial presence, but we're told not to talk about it. He says they're afraid of panic.
Right.
So, yeah. And then, of course, there's another one, too, and that is there's a document that people can get their hands on by writing to NASA. It was written by J.F. Bloomrich. He was a NASA engineer, and he made the statement that the moon and Earth has been visited on a regular basis by extraterrestrial beings. He made that statement after an 18-month study into the UFO issue. And disclosure has happened, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Well, it's interesting you make that statement because with the Space Force now and with the Navy pilot UFO disclosures, the Tic Tac incident that made mainstream headlines, what appears to be going on now is that the federal government and whatever organization runs the federal government, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call it, that these very powerful players understand that so many just plain ordinary people are doing so much good research with the internet and other sources, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, where you can request documents and get them if you word it just right. They're realizing that they can't maintain this 70-year lie, what I call the big lie. Yeah. They can't sustain it anymore. Well, they've had 70 years to reverse engineer craft. So the current narrative is the craft are real, but they all came from human engineering. There is no such thing as an alien being from another world or dimension. I don't buy it, and a lot of other people don't buy it either. These craft had to come from somewhere. We're just not that smart. I don't believe it. And I would believe it, except that there's all this other evidence that says we are building scientific teams to reverse engineer downed craft. We've brought in doctors to do autopsies on aliens. Yeah. You know, that's why I believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it goes back to one of my questions I wrote earlier. What do the extraterrestrial beings know about space and spirituality? What do they know? What have they talked to people like us about that reflects what they know? Do you know anything about that?
To the best of my understanding, the reality of reality is that this is hard to say, but basically most human beings, at least, are incarnated eternal beings. That most beings, all beings in the universe, have an eternal nature, but eternity is boring. And to fight boredom, disembodied beings may elect to incarnate in a physical body on a planetary system to some extent of their choosing. These are dynamics that are very difficult to explain and understand, but basically end up going into a human body to live out a lifetime with a forgetting mechanism so that you don't remember you're an eternal being. And if you think of it in terms of eternity is boring and I'm coming into a body to entertain myself, then conditions such as human suffering, and I don't mean to belittle anyone's personal condition or family condition by any way, shape, or form. I know we've all suffered to some extent or another, much more than others. But if you're an eternal being whose problem is boredom, living a life in a body on a material plane, such as ours, could present opportunities to have emotions and physical sensations that you don't experience out of the body. In terms of what unifies the universes, it's very clear that it is a force of love everybody calls God. There is a God force from which everything originates, and the nature is love. Yes, we have hate. That's a whole different topic.
Yeah, but that's just
the
lack
nature
of
of the
love.
universe is love, and light is a manifestation of that. I'm not going to get too much into the physics and metaphysics of it. Love is all there is, to quote the Beatles. That's why we're here, to learn how to love each other despite being in physical bodies. And I think Mahatma Gandhi really showed that. He went on hunger strikes and had a relative disregard for his physical health to make an ethical point and a political point. At the time, India was a British colony, and he wanted to free his people from that sovereignty. The nation had had a history before the Brits of autonomy, and maybe they weren't the best at it, maybe they weren't the worst, but at least they had that freedom and independence. And Gandhi believed very firmly that it was their right to have it again. And he did extreme things that hurt his physical body because he understood, he had to have understood, that the physical body is a shell, existence is Maya, or illusion, and I'm weaving in several philosophies altogether. I'm an eclectic. I take what works. We're here either because we chose to learn or we need to learn. That goes back to the Buddhist tenet that you may learn from joy or suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's my take on it. How about you?
Yeah. Well, I have heard testimonies from people that have been both abducted and invited onto the ships and had conversations with them. And they've been told that there is no such thing as death. It is just an illusion. The whole existence is basically a program that you are initiating yourself when you are taking and creating your body. So most of the things we see in our existence isn't so. It is more or less an illusion. But that's my opinion. And I want to get to, we got 10 minutes left here. So talk to us a little bit about unknown objects and your book, so we can get a little idea of what people can find in there.
Well, thank you. What I did was write an introductory book to UFOs because the topic is gaining interest with YouTube and History Channel and other program broadcasts. Average people who have passing interest in the topic are having curiosity about this. So I decided one way I can help educate and entertain, which is what I do, is to write a coffee table book or an airport read on a pocket book about the top 10 U.S. UFO cases called unknown objects. That's a term the military came up with when they were struggling to understand this phenomenon after World War II. So historically, in 1941, allegedly, a UFO crashed in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. After World War II, which ended after the Japanese bombings in 1945, American fighters, airmen, came home from the European and Japanese theaters, the Pacific theaters, with reports of Foo Fighters, what they called Foo Fighters, named after a comic strip reference that was relevant to them at that time. The Foo Fighters were firefighters, and these were fiery balls in the sky. So as kind of a joking, these guys were scared out of their pants. They're up in a plane. They've got these orbs following them, literally flying circles around the planes, either visible or invisible to radar, depending. And they brought these stories home, especially when they were sitting at the bars and relaxing a little bit. They had been told, I'm sure, not to say too much, but at that time, 1945 to 1946, the phenomenon of UFOs began to enter the American consciousness through direct reporting from people who claimed to be eyewitnesses.
Yeah.
So chapter 1 is about Foo Fighters. Then in subsequent chapters, I build on the previous topic and wind up with the Phoenix Lights, March 1997. So this is all so last century. Okay, and I have people say, why don't you write about current stuff? Well, I do in my articles, but for a top 10 UFO cases, my point was that by year 2000, just plain folks, as well as governments, had plenty of reasons, if not evidence, to give some credence to this UFO thing. Okay, so in every chapter, I first tell the story because I love telling stories. As you can tell, I love to talk. I look at the observers. Who saw this stuff? Who reported it? How credible are they? Then the publicity. Was there any media coverage? And if so, was it slanted? And how did the public respond to publicity? And then why is this case important enough to be included in this top 10 book? And then a few closing remarks where I feel free to editorialize and give my opinions, which I've tried not to do up until that point as a factual reporter. I give my opinions and lead into the next chapter.
Mm-hmm. So which one did you list as number one, most important one?
Well, it's not that any one is more important than any of the others. These are arranged in time order. Chronology, okay? So it starts with the Foo Fighters right after World War II, then Kenneth Arnold, 2 weeks before the Roswell crash or crashes, depending on your source. Mm-hmm. So Kenneth Arnold, Chapter 2, Roswell, Chapter 3, the invasion of Washington, which almost no one has heard about, but there were flotillas of UFOs playing tag and hide-and-go-seek with the U.S. Air Force over the skies, the restricted airspace of Washington, D.C., went on for weeks in July of 1952, made headlines, never explained. Then Betty and Barney Hill, as I mentioned earlier, the first highly publicized abduction case, and not because they wanted it, because a European newswire caught wind of this story and released it. They were afraid they'd lose their jobs. And then Kecksburg, which is maybe a lesser known case, but what's interesting about that case is that government propaganda got half of a city or town to believe that something the other half said happened didn't happen.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And then the UFOs that became present at Malmstrom and other northern Western Plains, United States Air Force bases. This is Captain Robert Salas and others. And then Travis Walton, who's still alive and lecturing and speaking, raising consciousness about UFOs. His abduction case, which was notable because he was abducted for 5 days and then brought back.
Yep.
And the people with him were accused of murdering him out in the woods. And when he came back, the murder charges were dropped, but a whole lot of questions stayed behind. Then I felt it was important to include a chapter on cattle and other animal mutilations. At the end of that chapter, I dwell at some length on the work of Linda Moulton Howe, who's been a lifelong inspiration to me as a TV show producer. She broke this story with Alien Harvest. She wrote a book and did a film production as well. She lectures. She's a big name ufologist, and rightfully so. She's the bee's knees, but many other people are also researching cattle mutilations. These are bloodless animal mutilations with no tracks or traces of anything, human or otherwise. They're not satanic cults, which is a popular cover story from the law enforcement and media. And they're not Satanists, they're not youth gangs, they're not, nobody knows. It's really weird. That's what coined they didn't coin the phrase high strangeness, but it's a phrase that Moulton Howe uses a lot. And then, as I said, I end with Phoenix Lights, which was a mass sighting where a huge craft, there were actually two parts of the Phoenix Lights, and I cover both of them in my book. But most people have heard about an enormous craft that was very low from the mountaintops, and so people who lived in houses on mountaintops, which run through the center of Phoenix, by the way, in case you're not familiar with that city. It has a mountain range that cuts through the middle of the town. So many houses are built at altitude compared to the base, the city down below. People came out of their houses or were outside. They looked up and there was an object that was blacking out the stars. It had an oily black surface, made no noise at all, traveled rather slowly but deliberately in a certain direction, and then disappeared.
Oh, we got 1 minute left, so gosh, I hate to end this, but tell people where they can get a hold of you, so where they also can get your book.
Oh, thanks. So my book is Unknown Objects, The Top 10 U.S. UFO Cases, available on Amazon in paperback or as an ebook. My website is www.lightwork111.com. I write as Lightworker111 for The Daily Conspiracy, Dimwit Politics, and other publications that are more political, really, than extraterrestrial specifically. And please email me, Gene@lightwork111.com. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gene. And
thank you very
we will
much.
be back next week. See you then.
This has been the Universal Consciousness Show.
The Universal Consciousness Show.
Your weekly guide to a deeper understanding of the all that we are.
Well, in a few years, it will be a matter of common sense to very many people that they're one with the universe. It'll be so simple.
Live Mondays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on the show, hosts, or their guests, please visit universal-consciousness-show.com. That's universal-consciousness-show.com. Remember, there's a shift coming. A new earthly paradigm. A shift to universal consciousness.
Universal consciousness.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51. Wait.